The day everyone called her a monster was the day one ordinary human decided to look twice. The station alarms had already faded into the background, blending with the constant mechanical heartbeat of Cartho's transit hub. Air recyclers hummed overhead. Cargo lifters groaned beneath towering freight containers. Shuttle engines rumbled through reinforced docking tunnels, sending faint vibrations across the polished steel floor. More than 200,000 travelers crossed the station every day, yet on this morning every path curved around the same empty circle as though an invisible wall had been built in the middle of the concourse. No one crossed it. No one even came close. In the center stood a young alien woman inside a transparent containment field that shimmered with pale blue light. She was nearly 6.5 feet tall, her deep sapphire skin reflecting the station lights like polished stone after rain. Long silver-white hair rested over one shoulder, unmoving despite the constant ventilation currents. Thin restraint cuffs encircled her wrists, connected only by glowing magnetic bands rather than heavy chains, as though even the engineers who built the field feared getting too close. Above her, a floating security drone projected a simple warning in bright crimson letters. "Do not approach." Travelers glanced toward her for only a heartbeat before lowering their eyes and hurrying away. Parents quietly guided children toward another corridor. Merchants abandoned nearby kiosks. Even armed security officers maintained a careful distance, watching from behind reinforced barriers instead of standing beside the containment field. Rumors traveled faster than cargo ships in the outer systems. Some claimed she could shatter steel without lifting a hand. Others insisted entire settlements had vanished wherever she appeared. No one seemed interested in proving whether any of it was true. Fear had already become its own evidence. The silence surrounding her felt strangely louder than the crowded station itself. She never shouted. She never struck the glowing barrier. She simply stood with her head lowered, golden eyes fixed on the polished floor beneath her boots, almost as if she hoped becoming invisible might finally let the world forget she existed. Every few minutes the containment field released a soft electronic pulse, washing blue light across her face before fading again. She never reacted. Across the concourse, Ethan Carter adjusted the worn strap of his equipment case as he stepped off Freight Elevator 12. At 36 years old, the human maintenance engineer looked exactly like someone who had spent more nights inside engine rooms than comfortable apartments. His brown work jacket carried faded patches from half a dozen shipping companies. His boots showed years of repairs instead of replacements. A small diagnostic tablet blinked with unfinished work orders clipped to his belt. He had exactly 43 minutes before his transport departed. Replace a damaged fusion regulator. Sign the paperwork. Leave the station. That had been the entire plan. He barely noticed the unusual crowd at first. Stations were always noisy, always crowded, always full of delays. Then he realized something impossible. Thousands of people were moving, yet every single one walked around the same empty space. Human curiosity had built cities, crossed oceans, and reached the stars. It also made people stop when everyone else refused to. Ethan slowed his pace. Then he stopped completely. He followed the frightened faces until his eyes found the young woman standing alone inside the shimmering barrier. Around him conversations became whispers. "Don't stare. Keep walking. That's her. She isn't safe." Ethan heard every warning. He ignored every one of them. Because before he noticed the restraint cuffs, before he noticed the warning drones, before he noticed the frightened crowd, he noticed something nobody else seemed willing to see. She looked exhausted. Ethan remained where he was while the current of travelers continued flowing around him like water splitting around an ancient stone. The longer he watched, the stranger the scene became. Nobody looked at the young woman for more than a second. Their eyes always drifted away, pulled down by fear or habit before curiosity had a chance to take hold. The security drones hovered in perfect formation, their quiet rotors blending with the low hum of environmental systems overhead. Somewhere beyond the concourse, a shuttle announced final boarding in 6 different languages. The ordinary rhythm of station life continued as though the lonely figure inside the containment field had become another piece of equipment instead of a living person. Ethan adjusted the grip on his weathered equipment case and glanced toward the nearest security officer. The officer wore polished composite armor with the station emblem across his shoulder, yet he stood nearly 30 feet from the barrier instead of beside it. "What happened?" Ethan asked. The officer hesitated before answering. "Official reports are restricted. Unofficial ones." The officer let out a slow breath. "People say she brings disasters wherever she goes. Entire settlements evacuated before she even arrived. Cargo crews refused to transport her. Scientists refused to examine her. Nobody wants to be responsible if the stories are true." Ethan looked back toward the woman. She had not moved. Not once. That bothered him. Truly dangerous people rarely stood perfectly still. Frightened people often did. He noticed small details that the warning signs could not erase. The faint shadows beneath her golden eyes. The slow rise and fall of her breathing. One boot was slightly turned inward, almost as if she had been standing in the same position for hours to avoid disturbing anyone. A maintenance robot rolled across the polished floor, carrying replacement lighting panels. As it approached the containment field, it automatically adjusted its path several feet away before continuing toward another corridor. Even machines had been programmed to keep their distance. Ethan frowned. Fear had become part of the station's operating procedure. His wrist communicator vibrated gently. Dock 12. Departure in 35 minutes. Another reminder appeared almost immediately. Fusion regulator installation overdue. Captain requesting status update. Ethan silenced both notifications without reading the rest. Deadlines had always mattered to him. Broken engines could leave families stranded between worlds. Delayed repairs could cost companies thousands of credits. Yet somehow none of those responsibilities felt as urgent as the unanswered question standing alone beneath the cold station lights. He stepped closer. The nearest drone rotated instantly toward him. A calm artificial voice filled the air. "Citizen, please remain behind the designated safety markers." Ethan stopped just outside the glowing line painted across the floor. The young woman slowly lifted her head. For the first time, their eyes met without a crowd between them. They were not the eyes of someone searching for an opportunity. They were the eyes of someone waiting for another disappointment. There was no hatred inside them. No challenge. No silent threat. Only quiet exhaustion layered over something even heavier. Resignation. As though she had already accepted that every face she saw would eventually disappear. Ethan offered the smallest nod, almost too subtle to notice. He did not smile. Smiles demanded trust, and trust could not be rushed. He simply acknowledged her existence the same way one person acknowledges another. To his surprise, the alien woman blinked once, lowering her gaze for only a moment before looking back at him again. It was a tiny movement, almost invisible beneath the pale blue glow of the containment field, but it felt more honest than every frightened rumor echoing through the station. The soft blue glow of the containment field reflected across Ethan's face as several long seconds passed without either of them speaking. Around them, the station continued breathing through layers of machinery and routine. Freight elevators climbed towering shafts with a steady metallic rhythm. Air circulation fans whispered through hidden vents. Digital arrival boards flickered with destinations scattered across dozens of star systems. The galaxy refused to pause for a single frightened soul. Yet for Ethan, the noise seemed to drift farther away with every heartbeat. The young woman continued watching him with cautious uncertainty, almost as though she expected him to vanish the moment someone called his name. Instead, he took one slow step closer until he stood just outside the painted security boundary. Immediately, another warning tone echoed from the hovering drones. "Citizen, maintain minimum safe distance." Ethan stopped without arguing. He respected safety rules. He had spent 15 years repairing ships because ignoring procedures usually ended badly. But procedures were only useful when they were built on truth. Something about this entire situation felt built on assumption instead. The alien woman's eyes shifted briefly toward the drones before returning to him. For the first time, he noticed how carefully she controlled every movement. She did not fidget. She did not pace. Even her breathing remained measured, almost disciplined. It reminded him of technicians working beside unstable reactor cores, where every unnecessary motion increased the risk of a mistake. That observation settled quietly into the back of his mind. People who feared losing control often appeared calmer than everyone around them. "Has she spoken to anyone?" Ethan asked the nearby officer without taking his eyes away from her. The officer folded his arms. "Not willingly. Medical teams attempted interviews yesterday. She answered only basic identification questions. Does she have a name? Another pause followed. Lasara. Ethan repeated it silently. It sounded less like the name of a monster and more like the name of someone who had once belonged somewhere. He looked back at her. Lasara. Her expression changed so slightly that most people would have missed it. Her shoulders did not move. Her face remained composed. Yet the faintest trace of surprise appeared in her golden eyes. He had spoken her name instead of her reputation. Across the concourse, a little human boy tugged gently on his mother's sleeve and pointed toward the containment field. Before the child could ask a question, his mother quietly guided him in another direction. Ethan watched them disappear into the crowd. Fear, he realized, could be taught without a single harsh word. Lasara noticed the exchange as well. Her gaze followed the family until they disappeared behind a transport column. Only then did she lower her eyes again. Ethan recognized the look because he had seen something similar years earlier in rescue shelters after mining accidents. Survivors often blamed themselves for making others uncomfortable, even when they had done nothing wrong. His communicator vibrated again with another reminder about the waiting transport. He dismissed it without looking. The captain could replace a damaged regulator. Replacing compassion was much harder. Ethan reached into the side pocket of his jacket and removed a small insulated bottle of water that he always carried during maintenance shifts. He held it loosely in one hand, not offering it yet, simply letting her see it. Lasara looked at the bottle for a brief moment before lifting her eyes to meet his once more. There it was again. Not anger, not suspicion, just the quiet hesitation of someone who had almost forgotten what kindness looked like. The insulated bottle remained in Ethan's hand for several quiet seconds. He made no sudden movement and offered no persuasive speech. He simply waited. Years spent repairing damaged spacecraft had taught him that delicate systems responded better to patience than force. Trust, he suspected, worked much the same way. The nearest security officer watched with growing concern. Do not attempt to pass anything through the containment field, he warned. Protocol exists for a reason. Ethan nodded without taking his eyes off Lasara. Then help me follow the protocol. The officer looked surprised. What do you mean? There has to be a safe transfer port for food and water. Someone installed one. Otherwise, she could not have remained here this long. The officer hesitated before pointing toward a narrow compartment built into the base of the shimmering barrier. It blended almost perfectly into the polished floor, nearly invisible unless someone knew where to look. Ethan crouched beside the panel and placed the bottle inside. The compartment sealed itself with a soft hydraulic hiss before sliding slowly through the energy field. Blue light shimmered across its metal surface. A second later, it opened on the opposite side. Lasara stared at the bottle, but did not move. Around them, several travelers slowed their pace. Curiosity was quietly beginning to challenge fear. Ethan remained where he was, resting one hand on his equipment case. It is yours if you want it, he said in a calm voice. No conditions. She continued watching him instead of the bottle, almost as though she could not understand why anyone would offer something without expecting payment in return. Nearly a full minute passed before she finally stepped forward. Every movement was careful and measured. She reached toward the compartment with elegant blue fingers, paused briefly, then gently lifted the bottle. She did not drink immediately. Instead, she examined it, turning it once beneath the pale station lights. The label was faded from months inside Ethan's work bag. Nothing expensive, nothing remarkable, just clean water carried by an ordinary maintenance engineer who had expected nothing unusual from his day. Finally, she unscrewed the cap and took a small sip. Her shoulders relaxed so slightly that only someone watching closely would have noticed. Ethan noticed. The security officer noticed as well, although he quickly pretended not to. Thank you, Lasara said quietly. Her voice was lower and softer than Ethan had imagined, carrying a calm musical tone that barely rose above the background noise of the station. It was the first complete sentence anyone nearby had heard from her all day. Several people stopped walking altogether. Ethan smiled gently. You are welcome. Silence returned, but it no longer felt cold. The station announcements continued overhead. Docking clamps released another transport. Cargo machinery rolled across distant corridors. Yet inside the glowing circle surrounding the containment field, the atmosphere had changed in a way no sensor could measure. Ethan noticed faint scratches around the restraint cuffs resting against Lasara's wrists. They were not fresh. They looked like marks left by countless inspections and adjustments over many days. What caught his attention even more was something almost everyone else had ignored. Her hands never trembled. Her breathing never became uneven. She carried herself with extraordinary discipline, as though every quiet breath required deliberate effort. The realization settled heavily inside his mind. She was not afraid of everyone around her. She was afraid of something happening to them. As that thought took shape, Lasara slowly lowered the bottle and looked directly into Ethan's eyes once more. This time there was something new behind the exhaustion. It was small enough to disappear if someone blinked. But it was there. Hope. Hours slipped quietly across Cartho's transit hub as the bright white lighting above the central concourse gradually softened into the warmer amber tones of the station's artificial evening cycle. Passenger traffic slowly thinned. Families hurried toward departing transports. Cargo crews finished their final inspections before night maintenance began. The constant mechanical rhythm remained unchanged, but the atmosphere felt less hurried, as though even the station itself had decided to breathe more slowly. Ethan was still there. His transport had departed without him nearly 2 hours earlier. 3 unanswered messages waited on his communicator beside a growing list of missed work notifications. He had silenced every one of them. Instead of standing directly beside the containment field, he sat on a nearby maintenance crate with his equipment case resting beside his boots. He never stared at Lasara. Every few minutes, he glanced toward her, then returned to reading technical diagrams on his tablet or watching the distant shuttle traffic beyond the panoramic observation windows. He wanted her to understand something simple. He was not guarding her. He was simply choosing not to leave. The security officers gradually relaxed as the evening passed without incident. Their conversations became quieter. One of the hovering drones returned to its charging station while another assumed its patrol route. Even the station commander briefly walked through the concourse before continuing without interruption. Nothing extraordinary happened. That, Ethan realized, was exactly what made the afternoon extraordinary. For the first time in countless days, someone had remained near Lasara without panic following close behind. Eventually she spoke again. "Your ship left." Ethan looked up from his tablet and smiled faintly. "It did. You missed your departure because of me. I missed one departure. There will be another tomorrow." She lowered her eyes. "Most people consider me an emergency. I do not." A quiet silence settled between them once more. Outside the massive observation windows, distant freighters drifted through the darkness like slow-moving constellations. Their running lights reflected softly across the polished station floor. Ethan noticed Lasara watching the stars instead of the passing crowds. There was unmistakable longing in her expression, not for freedom alone, but for home. "When was the last time you saw your world?" he asked gently. She remained silent for several heartbeats before answering. "Long enough that I no longer remember the color of its sunrise." Her words lingered in the air long after her voice faded. Ethan had repaired ships belonging to explorers, miners, scientists, and diplomats. He had listened to countless stories from travelers who missed familiar skies. Until that moment, he had never realized homesickness could sound so quiet. A station employee arrived carrying a fresh thermal blanket as part of the evening inspection routine. He stopped several feet away from the containment field, clearly uncertain. Ethan accepted the folded blanket with a thankful nod and placed it inside the transfer compartment without saying a word. When it emerged on the opposite side, Lasara hesitated only briefly before wrapping it around her shoulders. The soft gray fabric contrasted gently against her deep blue skin, and for the first time since Ethan had arrived, some of the tension slowly disappeared from her posture. She closed her eyes for only a moment, almost as though she had forgotten what simple comfort felt like. Ethan looked away to give her privacy. The station lights reflected across the transparent barrier in gentle waves of blue and gold. Somewhere overhead, the ventilation system released a slow, calming sigh. Neither of them noticed that several people passing through the concourse had quietly stopped to watch. They were no longer looking at a dangerous prisoner. They were watching 2 strangers share nothing more remarkable than ordinary kindness. Sometimes that was enough to make old fears begin to crack. The station entered its artificial night cycle with a quiet dignity that only places between the stars seemed to possess. The bright commercial displays dimmed to softer colors, and the polished floor reflected long ribbons of amber light stretching toward distant docking bays. Maintenance crews replaced merchants. Engineers replaced tourists. The endless motion slowed without ever truly stopping. Ethan remained seated beside his equipment case, listening to the familiar chorus of cooling fans, hydraulic doors, and distant shuttle engines. Then the peaceful rhythm changed. Heavy footsteps echoed through the concourse with practiced precision. Four station security officials entered the restricted area accompanied by two administrators wearing dark blue diplomatic uniforms. Their arrival silenced nearby conversations almost immediately. The senior administrator activated a small holographic projector, and a translucent document appeared above his wrist. "Containment review begins immediately," he announced. "Subject Lasara will be transferred to the High Council holding facility pending final judgment." The words settled over the concourse like cold winter air. Ethan slowly stood. Final judgment for what? The administrator looked toward him with polite surprise. "Citizen, this matter is classified. She has stood here peacefully all day. That does not alter the existing risk assessment." Ethan glanced toward Lasara. She had lowered her eyes once again, almost as though she had expected this moment from the beginning. There was no protest in her expression, only acceptance. Somehow that troubled him more than anger would have. "Has anyone actually investigated what happened?" Ethan asked. "Or have you only investigated the rumors?" One of the security officers shifted uncomfortably. The administrator folded his hands behind his back. Multiple incident reports associate her presence with catastrophic events across several frontier colonies. Associate is not the same as proof. The administrator remained silent. Ethan took a slow breath. Years spent solving mechanical failures had taught him one lesson above all others. Symptoms could be misleading. A failing engine often sounded healthy until the final minute, while a noisy one frequently needed nothing more than a simple adjustment. Assumptions made poor mechanics, and sometimes they made poor judges as well. "Has anyone asked why she stayed instead of running?" he continued. "Has anyone questioned why she has remained perfectly cooperative? Why she has harmed no one here despite every opportunity?" No answer came. Around them, maintenance workers had quietly stopped to listen. Even the security officers seemed less certain than before. Ethan looked back toward Lasara. She still stood wrapped in the gray thermal blanket, her hands resting calmly in front of her. Her breathing remained steady. Every movement reflected remarkable self-control. Suddenly another detail returned to his memory. Throughout the entire day, she had never once touched the shimmering energy barrier surrounding her, not even by accident. She had maintained the same careful distance every hour. That was not the behavior of someone desperate to escape. It was the behavior of someone determined not to create unnecessary concern for others. Ethan turned toward the administrator once more. "You are preparing to make a permanent decision about a person you clearly do not understand." The older man studied him quietly before replying. "And you believe one afternoon is enough to understand her?" Ethan shook his head gently. "No. I believe one afternoon is enough to realize that we have not been asking the right questions." For the first time since the officials arrived, Lasara slowly lifted her head. Her golden eyes met Ethan's across the soft blue glow of the containment field. Hidden beneath the exhaustion was something almost forgotten. It was not confidence. It was not relief. It was the fragile beginning of believing that someone might finally be willing to search for the truth instead of accepting the fear. The conversation ended not with raised voices, but with an uneasy silence that spread through the concourse faster than any announcement. The senior administrator lowered the holographic report and exchanged a thoughtful glance with the station commander. For the first time that evening, certainty seemed less solid than procedure. Before anyone could speak again, every overhead light dimmed for a fraction of a second. The floor beneath Ethan's boots trembled so lightly that most travelers mistook it for another departing freighter. Then the emergency speakers activated with a calm mechanical tone. "Attention! Energy stabilization systems are experiencing an unexpected fluctuation. Engineering teams are responding. Please remain calm." The announcement repeated in 3 additional languages. Ethan immediately recognized the wording. Stations never used the word unexpected unless something truly unusual had happened. His engineering instincts took over before anyone else reacted. He pulled out his diagnostic tablet and connected to the public maintenance network. Streams of system data rolled across the screen. Power distribution, thermal regulation, reactor balance. None of the numbers made sense. Every subsystem showed a brief spike before returning almost perfectly to normal, as though something enormous had absorbed the disturbance instead of allowing it to spread. He frowned. That was impossible. What is happening? The administrator asked after noticing Ethan studying the display. The station should have experienced a cascading overload, Ethan answered quietly. Instead, the surge disappeared. Another gentle vibration passed beneath the floor. This time, Lasara closed her eyes. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the gray blanket, and a faint expression of weariness crossed her face. Ethan noticed immediately. No one else did. Everyone around him turned toward the ceiling, searching for damaged lights or malfunctioning equipment. Ethan looked only at her. She was breathing more slowly now, each breath deliberate, measured, almost as though she were concentrating on something invisible. The soft blue containment field surrounding her flickered for only an instant before stabilizing again. Ethan's heartbeat quickened. He compared the exact timestamp on his tablet with the moment her expression had changed. The readings matched perfectly. Every energy fluctuation corresponded with the same fraction of a second. Coincidence rarely survived careful observation. She felt it before the alarms, he whispered. The security officer beside him looked confused. Felt what? Ethan enlarged the diagnostic graphs. Whatever is happening inside the station. Another maintenance alert appeared. Reactor variance contained. Source undetermined. Ethan stared at the final two words. Source undetermined. Engineers hated those words because they meant the numbers existed before the explanation did. He slowly raised his eyes toward Lasara. She was no longer looking at him. She was staring through the observation windows into the darkness beyond the station, her golden eyes reflecting distant stars with quiet concentration. There was no fear in her expression. There was effort. Careful, exhausting effort. As another nearly invisible tremor passed beneath the floor, she inhaled slowly and closed her eyes again. A second later, the warning lights across Ethan's diagnostic display returned to green. His mind assembled the scattered pieces with growing clarity. The stories had claimed disasters followed wherever she went. The station data suggested something entirely different. Every fluctuation had stopped before becoming dangerous, and every stabilization had occurred at precisely the moment Lasara appeared most exhausted. Ethan lowered the tablet, his pulse suddenly louder than the machinery around him. He no longer believed the station was protecting everyone from her. A far more astonishing possibility had begun to take shape. Perhaps, from the moment she arrived, she had been protecting everyone else. The maintenance network refreshed again, filling Ethan's tablet with streams of engineering data that scrolled faster than his eyes could comfortably follow. He filtered the information by timestamp, then by reactor load, then by energy distribution across the station's primary grid. Every graph pointed toward the same impossible conclusion. The fluctuations were real. The danger had been real. Yet each instability had faded before the automated stabilization systems could even respond. Ethan zoomed in on the sensor logs until individual milliseconds filled the screen. The station's emergency regulators activated after every disturbance, but they always arrived too late. Something else had already restored equilibrium. His eyes drifted back toward Lasara. She stood quietly beneath the pale blue glow of the containment field, the gray blanket wrapped neatly around her shoulders. Tiny beads of perspiration shimmered along her forehead despite the cool temperature inside the concourse. Her breathing had become slightly slower than before, each careful inhale followed by an equally measured exhale. She looked less like a prisoner waiting for judgment and more like an exhausted engineer refusing to abandon her post. Ethan turned the tablet toward the station administrator. Look at the sequence, he said. The reactor spikes disappear before the safety systems engage. Your own logs prove it. The administrator studied the display without speaking. Nearby technicians gathered around, comparing the public maintenance data with their own secured diagnostics. One after another, puzzled expressions replaced confident assumptions. A senior systems engineer quietly adjusted his glasses before whispering, "He is right. The station regulators are reacting to a problem that has already been solved." The words spread through the small group like a ripple across still water. Ethan continued connecting the pieces. You said every colony associated Lysara with catastrophic events. Did anyone compare the reports with what happened afterward? No one answered immediately. The silence itself became an answer. At last, the administrator opened another secure file. Archived incident summaries appeared in the holographic display. Frontier Station Helios. Mining Platform 7. The Orlon Research Array. Every location listed a severe energy anomaly followed by unexplained stabilization. Every report focused on the anomaly. None examined the recovery. Ethan looked toward Lysara again. You stayed because leaving would have allowed the failures to continue, did not you? For the first time since they met, she did not lower her eyes. She held his gaze quietly before giving the smallest nod. My species can absorb unstable stellar resonance, she said softly. Only for a while. Her voice carried no pride, only fatigue. The surrounding technicians stared at her in disbelief. The resonance follows damaged reactor fields, she continued. Wherever I travel, I remain nearby until the systems become stable again. The energy cannot disappear. It has to move somewhere. Ethan finally understood the exhaustion he had noticed from the beginning. It had never been fear draining the strength from her face. It had been responsibility. Every unexplained fluctuation. Every long silent hour. Every careful breath had been part of an invisible burden no one else had recognized. The administrator slowly lowered the holographic display. Then the disasters. Lysara answered before he could finish. Most places remembered the alarms. Very few remembered that everyone survived. No one spoke after that. Beyond the observation windows, distant freighters crossed the darkness beneath scattered stars. Inside the station, the machinery continued its endless rhythm, unaware that one quiet truth had just overturned years of fearful assumptions. Ethan slipped his tablet back into his jacket without looking away from Lysara. He had searched for a hidden defect inside a machine. Instead, he had uncovered something far rarer. The person everyone believed had brought danger had quietly spent years carrying it away from everyone else. Morning arrived without a sunrise. Like every space station orbiting between distant worlds, Carthos welcomed a new day through carefully programmed light instead of a rising sun. Soft gold illumination spread across the vast concourse, washing away the cool blue tones of the artificial night. Travelers filled the corridors once again. Freight carts rolled toward docking bays. Coffee vendors reopened their counters. Shuttle announcements echoed overhead with calm precision. Life resumed exactly where it had paused. Yet something subtle had changed. The containment field surrounding Lysara had been deactivated. The shimmering barrier that had separated her from the rest of the station for so many days no longer existed. The restraint cuffs rested quietly on an inspection table nearby, no longer locked around her wrists. The station administrator stood before a gathering of engineers, security officers, and civilian witnesses, his voice carrying through the open concourse without the aid of amplification. After reviewing the complete engineering records, archived incident reports, and verified maintenance data, this station formally recognizes that previous conclusions were based on incomplete evidence. Lysara acted as a stabilizing presence during multiple energy emergencies across frontier settlements. Her actions prevented widespread system failures that would otherwise have endangered countless lives. No applause followed. The silence that answered him felt far more meaningful. It was the silence of people confronting their own assumptions. One by one, security officers lowered their heads in quiet respect. Maintenance technicians who had examined the data stepped forward to thank her personally. A little human boy, the same child who had been guided away the day before, looked up at his mother before walking across the polished floor with careful determination. He stopped a few feet from Lysara, smiled shyly, and held out a small paper star he had folded by hand while waiting for their departure. Lysara accepted it with both hands as though it were something priceless. "Thank you," she whispered. The child simply smiled and returned to his family. Ethan watched the moment from several yards away, leaning against his weathered equipment case. He had repaired thousands of broken machines during his career, yet this felt different. Sometimes what needed repair was not metal, wiring, or engines. Sometimes it was the story people believed about someone they had never truly known. A transport vessel assigned to Lysara's home sector waited quietly beyond Dock 9. Its silver hull reflected the station lights like calm water beneath distant stars. Before boarding, she walked toward Ethan. Neither of them hurried. Neither searched for complicated words. She stopped in front of him and looked into his eyes with a peaceful expression he had not seen until now. "You gave me something I thought I had lost," she said softly. Ethan smiled. "I only listened." She shook her head ever so slightly. "No. You looked." For a long moment, neither of them spoke again. They simply watched the endless movement of the station around them. Travelers continued their journeys. Engineers returned to unfinished repairs. Somewhere a shuttle departed with its engines humming through the structure. Ordinary life moved forward, exactly as it should. Lasara folded the small paper star carefully inside the gray blanket Ethan had given her and carried both aboard her waiting transport. Ethan remained on the observation deck until the vessel became a single point of light among countless others scattered across the darkness. Only then did he shoulder his equipment case and begin walking toward his own delayed departure. The station behind him sounded exactly the same as it always had. Yet for everyone who had witnessed those quiet hours, it would never feel quite the same again. Because the greatest distance in the galaxy had never been measured in light years. It had always been the distance between fear and understanding, and sometimes all it took to cross it was one ordinary human willing to look a little longer.